Unspoiled Network podcast.
This is Spoil Me, covering Dandelion Dynasty Book 3, The Veiled Throne, Chapter 42, The Second Contest. In this episode, the restaurant wars continue, and we get another innovation based on an unsavory type of occupation that one of our characters relied on in her past. Welcome to Spoil Me. Welcome to the show, everyone. I am Natasha. Thank you so much to Kyle for commissioning this episode. Kyle is here in the chat, snowed in from work and ready to party, as he puts it. Hurrah. So, this is a really long chapter. It was interesting when I saw that it was only chapter 42. I was like, word? And then I checked in the audiobook. It's a 2-hour chapter. And it is entirely restaurant wars. And I am like really not sure how to feel about the restaurant wars portion of this book at this point, because I'm pretty into it, but I also feel slightly guilty at the fact that I almost feel like I'm the one that's neglecting the true atrocities and horrors that are happening in other parts of the story for the sake of a much more like trivial storyline. And I don't think that's actually fair, because I think that this storyline, there are a lot of parts within it that are hugely important, actually. It's just that the stakes, as far as we see them right now, are not as high. But I had said a few episodes ago that I was really enjoying getting a bit of a reprieve from all of the death and destruction and, atrocities. And I stand by that. But we have had more of the restaurant wars than anything in this like second half of the book. Does this count as second half? I actually don't know percentage wise where I'm at. Yeah. Okay. We're about 82% according to the, at the beginning of 42, according to my Kindle. So I'm really curious, covering this the way that I am. It stands out even more to me how much the restaurant wars takes up. But I'm curious what the experience was like for somebody reading the book in an ordinary way, and if they got frustrated by that or if they appreciated it or what. Kyle says, so the restaurant war is kind of divisive, as it's the main reason why this is a 4-book series. Leo said in an interview that he originally planned for book 3 for the main conflict to just play out and be resolved, but that it didn't feel satisfying to him. And then the idea for the Blossom Gang kind of popped into his head and didn't leave. Yeah, so the fact that this is divisive isn't surprising. And again, I'm not saying that I don't like it. Obviously, he is speaking my language in a lot of ways. Especially in the earlier ones where it was really about the food. But in this section, there's also a lot about the ways in which people manage restaurants, which I'm going to have some things to say about. So I am into it, but it feels like after front loading this book with the extremely upsetting shit that happened, to drop it and pretty much focus on only this for such a long time is a bit of a strange move. And what's tough about it is that you can't get Kinry where he needs to be for this story to take place without the atrocities being front loaded, because that's part of why he is sent away. So I'm not saying that I have a better idea of how to do this. I am just saying that I am aware that this structuring is a little bit odd, and it doesn't surprise me to hear that there are a lot of people who weren't fans. Let's see. Ms. T says, I'm usually a bit confused and have to just go along for the ride most of the time. So it was good for me reading the straightforward restaurant war part. Okay, I could see that. It's the story, there is so much going on that there are some books that I feel are not served well by the slow, methodical pace that I take covering things and the amount of discussion and sort of putting things under a magnifying glass sometimes that can happen here. Analyzing works a lot better for some things than others. And I think Dandelion Dynasty is excellent for that kind of coverage because there are so many moving parts and there are so many themes. It's very dense. So I could see that what's going on with the restaurant wars might actually feel like a bit of a relief. But personally, like I said, I like it. But there is it almost feels like, you just finished watching the 2016 election results rolled in, and then you decided to change the channel and watch Keeping Up with the Kardashians. Like, it feels like it's almost me being irresponsible, even though this is what the author is giving me. I don't have a choice in what parts of the story I pay attention to, So anyway, I just wanted to say that because I was really surprised at how much more of this we got. And clearly it's not quite done yet. So we are still, it's not only do we have more of the restaurant wars to go on with, but we have Huto, who is dealing with the fact that he was a laughingstock and he is not going to just take that gracefully. We know that he doesn't do that. Plus, he has been involved in this weird piracy thing, which that hasn't shaken out yet. And I have to assume it's linked with the way that he has handled Mozomu and what's going on with her family. There has to be some consequence for him specifically. And I am waiting for that part of things to shake out as well. But I'm very curious about whether or not how that shakes out is going to be related to specifically the restaurant thing, or if it's going to wind up being entirely separate, that we will finish the restaurant wars and then something will happen so that he shows his hand or gets found out, and it will be an entirely separate situation and set of events. Or are they going to partway through the competition discover something that causes the competition to end early or become invalid, or what? That's the part that I'm the most curious about, because as we're getting to the point we are, it's inevitable. So the passages that he had dug in, sort of basement, I guess, I don't know what I want to call it, but he had this whole series of sort of secret rooms. Those are being used for something, and they are actually attached to the restaurant. So it could go either way. But let's start with the actual beginning of this chapter here. Lolotika is hosting for the treasure chest that evening. And we find out that she has chosen the treasure chest because she is so sure the splendid urn is going to go down in flames. And she is very affectionate for the splendid urn and can't bear to watch that happen. So she decides to be on the side of the winning restaurant to save herself the emotional agony that it's going to cost, which I really do understand. And although there were parts of me that were like, man, you really don't have faith in this place, huh? Not as loyal as I wish you were, girl, but what can you do? And the treasure chest is, and I'm going to have to kind of go over this somewhat quickly because this is such a dense chapter that I cannot spend as much time on certain things. But overall, what we find out is that Huto has taken a bunch of the staff from other businesses that his family runs. And technically, because the rules only say that these people have to be employed by the restaurant owner, even if they weren't employed for the restaurant, it's still within the rules for him to take those workers and, just use them here instead. And this means that he has a pretty humongous staff for the evening, while, of course, a big part of what he was working on with his sabotage, which I didn't quite put together at the time, but now I understand, was him trying to not only scare customers away and ruin the reputation of the Splendid Urn, but also make it so that people didn't want to work there. So they lost a bunch of their staff and they can't hire anybody who will also be able to work in the competition because that's against the rules. So he has a huge advantage with the amount of staff he has. However, none of these people are trained to wait tables. And we get some pretty choice sequences that demonstrate why this kind of training is so important. And this is something that I think there are a lot of people out there in the world who have their thoughts on what it's like to work retail, what it's like to work in food service, and they have never actually done it, but they think they know how it goes. And I would just really like for all of those people to, as a requirement for civilization, work in a job like that for 1 year, not a month, not a week, a full year, because there is no explaining what that kind of job is like to someone who hasn't done it. It is so physical. It is so emotionally draining. You have to be turned on in a certain way that other jobs don't require, or that give you a bit of a reprieve in between customers. And the reprieves that you get when you're in this sort of food service, they're reprieves from putting your face on, but then what goes on when you're in your downtime is still very active and high energy a lot of the time. And then there are going to be the days where it's not busy, and somehow that's even more draining and dispiriting. It's just such a strange line of work and so specific. The types of experiences that you have when you do this work are the sort of thing that you will be able to commiserate with anyone who has worked in that job, whether they are, on the same continent as you, speak the same language as you. There's still just some things that are universal. Whether you worked in fine dining or not, you're still going to get it. And the ways that he takes for granted these people should be able to do this job, when a lot of them, one of them, she specifically mentions that she's a sparrow tile dealer. And that's, I'm assuming, kind of a blackjack sort of esque game, because these are people that are working for his family's casino in this other area. That is a kind of job, dealing cards. You don't have to have any personality. You don't have to be on. You need to have a sharp eye on things. You need to be able to maybe do some math quickly and handle some maybe tense, stressful situations with people who start to maybe get out of hand or are cheating or drinking too much. But it's a really different energy, and you don't have to keep track of things that are big moving parts the way that you do when you wait tables. So unsurprisingly, these folks who are just thrown into this, told that they have to do this job, are not able to keep up very well. And then on top of this, we find out that Mozo Moo, and this is clearly it's interesting to me that Huto doesn't seem to get what's happening here, but she puts on this big display of a tantrum and acts as if she's too good to make all of the ordinary food that the menu demands. Because since this is a service-based competition, they both are required to make the same items on the menu, because the food isn't what's being compared. So that has to remain the same to not influence people's opinions all that much. And Mozomu just really goes to town pretending to be this diva, and that she refuses to make the things the way that they are written. She's an artist. This is like an embarrassment. How can he ask her to debase herself like this? And then finally he's like, fine, fine, fine. You don't have to cook that day. And she looks really pleased for a split second, and he can't figure it out. And obviously it's because she knows that without her, shit's going to hit the fan. And that is indeed what happens. Because in the kitchen, when there isn't a head chef to sort of wrangle everyone, egos get very out of hand. And I think that this particular kind of experience is something that you really run across more when you work in bigger kitchens and you work in places that have more fine dining, because usually in fine dining, you do have the head chef and then the sous chef immediately below him. And then you have prep cooks. If you work in a smaller place, that hierarchy is a lot less distinct. And sometimes people do all of the jobs because it's not busy enough or there aren't enough tables to justify having a larger cooking staff. But if you are in somewhere that's fine dining and it's really big, you really run into people who are coming into the kitchen pretty ambitious, and they are looking to make a mark and stand out somehow so that they can move on and possibly run their own kitchen somewhere else, which means that people are really looking for the weak spots in the folks that they are working beside and eager to cut down whoever is supposed to be in charge. And this whole description of how like gets to be all of this backbiting and infighting is exactly correct. That's part of why kitchens are often in those situations run in a very military sort of way, because if you don't establish really strict boundaries, people will push it because they are trying to find ways in. They are trying to find ways to stand out. And I was engaged to the head chef for a particular restaurant for a while, who had worked under another couple of sous chefs. Plus I worked in a fine dining establishment for a few years. And yeah, the egos, even on people that you don't think really have them, it's that they just keep it to themselves, and then it leaks out at weird times. And you're like, oh, no, okay, you have it too. There really isn't a way to succeed in that industry if you don't, to be honest. You know, if you don't have an ego and know how to throw yourself around in a certain way, you stay as a prep cook. You don't manage to make it. So anyway, Huda does not understand any of this. He doesn't get how like difficult it is to keep track of which tables are where and who at the table ordered the thing. That's something in particular. You can even remember what orders go to which table. But I think that if I describe to you a situation in which you have the waiter that you place your order with come back and they place what you ordered specifically in front of you, it's a really different vibe than a food runner coming to your table with the tray of food and holding up a plate and saying, who had the blank? There's just a sense of, oh, I'm not important. You don't remember me. You weren't here before. It's, you know, when you are trying to specifically recall who ordered what, that is an indicator of extra effort that makes the people feel like you are really paying attention. And that's not to say that it's a totally different experience if you have a food runner, because you do wind up getting your food in the end, and that's the thing you're there for, right? Not always. You're sometimes there for the experience of feeling important. And if people are charging a premium for the name of the restaurant or for really good tables, and you don't get that extra perk of feeling like a VIP, you feel like you got ripped off, because that's sort of part of what is being sold. So he does two things here that are huge fuck ups. First, he tells them the ways to remember who ordered what at a table and how to use people's appearance to influence the way that they like remember the thing, talking about if a woman's ugly, if a man is bald. And this is something that Lulatika winds up sharing with the entire crowd. And I love this for her. She is so eager to help the Splendid Urn if she can, but not bend the rules. And technically, this isn't, he is saying this and she hears it and she shares it because she's allowed. And he should have been more careful about the way that he was going to, instruct them. But it does not go down well when his customers hear that this is the way he's recommending they be spoken about. It's, nobody wants to feel like this is how you see them. And then he decides later, because service slows down so badly due to the fact that Mozomu isn't here, he prioritizes the tables of all of the people on this list of judges that he received. And this is a beautiful sequence because I was sort of thinking this myself and I was really confused about it. He's got the list of judges, and yet this is the first time that everybody is like eating alongside the judges. We've got tons of ordinary people, and it's described earlier on in the chapter how some of these people are like scholars or priests or nuns. There are all kinds of walks of life, folks who are important in the community, but also folks who got picked with the lottery. And I was like, oh, so do those people just kind of get to share their overall impression and they're not getting to vote? I thought that seemed strange. It turns out they do indeed get to vote, but Huto doesn't realize that. So he is only prioritizing that the food that's super late go to the judges' tables, which means that they are carrying full steaming trays past hungry tables of people who ordered long before the table that's actually receiving the food. And they want to know what the fuck is going on. And he doesn't offer any explanation because he doesn't think they matter and that it just, tough shit for them. And it turns out it does matter. They are going to get to vote and they know why he was prioritizing certain people, and it looks really bad for him. And I just really enjoy the fact that he's so smug over the fact that Lolo notices he's serving the judges first. She realizes that he must have been outright cheating, but there's not really a good way to prove it. So she has to let it go. And he's really smirking to himself about the fact that she clearly knows that he was playing dirty and can't do anything about it. But then at the end, when she's like, why did you think that those were the only votes that mattered? Sucks to suck. He really keeps talking about how he's business is a battle and I'm a general. There's a moment where he says something, I'm like the very model of and it's a bit from fucking that play, that musical. I am the very model of a modern major general. I can't remember what show that's from, but I have never seen it. And it felt, that's what it is. Kyle says Pirates of Penzance. That's the one. I really don't care for the dropping in of that little joke, I have to admit. There are times where you can make a sort of reference like that within a story, and it's just a bit of a wink, and you're like, oh, I get what you were doing, and it's cute. And then there are times where it feels like you're going way too hard, and it's not a wink anymore. It's just an outright. And I was just sort of like, Ken Liu, what are you doing with this joke right here, dude? What is that? And maybe it would have hit better if I had actually seen Pirates of Penzance and knew what that character who has that line is actually like. Maybe it would, the parallel between him and Huto and I would be like, oh, I see what he's doing here. But as of, coming at it from where I am, I was just sort of like, oh boy. And this is something that can come up a lot in Dresden Files as well. He'll make little jokes and references that I just sort of roll my eyes at. Like I said, sometimes it works, but for me this time it definitely did not. I was just like, oh man, you really couldn't resist, could you? So while all of that is going on and people are waiting for their food, getting really impatient, he is forcing the staff to flirt. And says basically that if they don't, he's going to not only fire them, but blackball them by accusing them of being thieves. So these people are being forced to, like, just put themselves out there in a way that wasn't supposed to be part of the deal. And it's just gross. Like, you know, they figure out ways around it to be able to, like, create conversation and distract folks, but and without doing too much of the flirting thing, but it's still just, he's put them in a position to cover his ass that is forcing them to compromise themselves. And it's just really ugly. So meanwhile, at the Splendid Urn, we have this really wild thing going on. Winnowasu obviously doesn't have the staff to handle everybody the way that they intended. And I had said, you know, okay, so are they going to do something that's sort of automated? And that is what we get. We get an introduction to what they have done before we get the explanation of how they have done it. So the actual restaurant is lit in a really unusual way. The orbs are called silkmotic candles, but like Ratiera calls them that. The globes were in fact glass bowls placed upside down in a dish of mercury. Protruding up through the mercury and into the bowl was a small bamboo tube, at the top of which was mounted a fixed ring of wool. Through the center of the hollow bamboo tube rose a spindle that ended in a disc of amber. The spindle was turning rapidly, rubbing the amber disc against the woolen ring around it, and it was this action that generated the bright light that filled the glass globe and lit up the restaurant. So they have managed to create electric light that's being generated by the movement of an animal that's like turning that spindle. Cicadas, sometimes squirrels and mice. And when asked about it, and this was something that had never occurred to me, she explains that the reasoning is Dandelion, because they are so short-staffed, they need a means of lighting the restaurant that is extremely low maintenance and doesn't require constant checkups and replacing of candles and all of that. It never really occurred to me how high maintenance it would be to work in candlelight only. Like, I just never really stopped to think about it, because why would I? And when I think about the hassle of dealing with candles just as a decorative sort of thing, it's already a massive pain in the ass. And that's just for a couple of like like scented, you know, jar candles. But if that's the main source of light in the room, that or lanterns, that's a fucking ton of work. So when this was explained, I was like, oh, wow, that never even entered my head. Oh, Kyle says in the chat, fun fact, at the end of each book, there's a little section where Ken Liu talks about the real world inspirations for all the wacky technology in the books. It's fascinating. I am definitely going to check into that for this one, because I was really curious. There's this and a few other things that I was like, is this something, you know, I don't know how this is something that comes up a lot. When people talk about like going into the past, if they were to find a time machine and go back in time, we can say that we know how like modern technology can work, but we don't really usually know how to make it happen. We know that we have a ballpoint pen, and we know that we have a phone and, you know, indoor plumbing and gas stoves. How have we made those things happen though? Most of us don't really know how things work, you know? So he could have based everything on real shit or invented it full from his own mind. And I wouldn't really know either way, because I'm ignorant in this sense. Anyway, So that's how they're generating the light. And they also have way fewer servers than the other restaurant. And everyone's like, there's 200 of us. How are they going to fucking handle this? And this is wild. Dozens of little triangular carts emerged from the service tunnel on the first floor and filed into the restaurant. Some headed straight for the tables, while others lined up at the elevator for Kinry or Dandelion to crank them to the upper floors. At the tip of each cart was a little animal, a cat, a puppy, a pet mouse, a parrot, a monkey, or some other equally appealing creature. All the animals wore little hats in the shape of an inverted urn. Loden stood in the middle of the first floor and hollered, making sure that her voice carried to all the corners. Honored guests, tonight we're a little short-handed, as you can see, so we've borrowed some helpers. The drivers will guide the carts to your table, and there you'll see a stack of wax tablets and a writing knife with which you can indicate your order. Once you've recorded your choices, just load the tablet into the receptacle at the back of the cart, and our animal servers will guide the carts back to the kitchen to bring you your dishes. And the whole point of these animals is to distract them from the mechanics of how this is actually happening, which is hugely effective. And that makes total sense because, y'all, we love an adorable animal. I mean, whomst among us has not just completely gone at the sight of like a tiny kitten or an adorable puppy, as in my case, very recently. And we find out later that for the most part, this is received very well. There are, however, some folks who aren't like big fans. Mostly the issues are with folks who are feeling a bit of a way about the monkey that can be a little bit saucy. But mostly what it is people having to sort of write down their own order and send back the tablet. They're not a fan of not being waited on by a person, which is a legitimate thing. You know, like I had mentioned, I think 2 episodes ago, maybe last one, about going to a Korean restaurant that had a conveyor belt set up, and you took the food you wanted off the conveyor belt, and they would like tally up what you owed based on the type of plates that were left on your table. And it was a fun novelty to eat that way because it was a weird thing that we had never done before. And it's also a really good way to be able to try a bunch of different things because there are so many options available to you that you can just choose whatever. It's like a buffet kind of, you know, but the buffet that comes to you. So in that sense, it was fun. However, the lack of like personal attention, it definitely is felt after a little while. There comes a point where your drinks are empty, but you haven't had to have a server in a little bit because they don't really come out at the same rate. So you sit there with an empty drink, or maybe there's 1 or 2 items that aren't on the conveyor belt that you can only get from the menu, and you intended to order one, and because they're taking so long to come out, you're not sure you're going to be able to like get a chance to order it before you and your other people at the table are full, so you won't get to. There's just a certain something that comes from having an actual person. And while a little cart that rolls around with an extremely cute animal is definitely going to be a draw, there are going to be folks who feel like this isn't what I came for, though, you know? So I appreciated that he makes sure to say not everybody loved it, because that was the thing that occurred to me, was just sort of, you know, I know that the food is also excellent. So that's a big help, because the conveyor belt place I went to, the food was fine. It wasn't great. It was like the sense of it being out on a conveyor belt, you could tell that it had been sitting a little bit, the way that things on a buffet do. If that's not the case here, then that's a major thing that they don't have to worry about. Everything is just as freshly made. It's all high quality. So that's not really a factor. But there are times where if a restaurant decides that they're going to have a gimmick like this, they lean on it a little too hard, and they just sort of let the actual quality of their products fall by the wayside, because they feel like people don't come here for the good food. They come here for the experience, and that's more important. And that's not always true. So we get to go back 4 days earlier and see how this whole like system was created. And Kinri has busted in and is like, I think I figured out that we can save the day with this like self-guided cart that Rati had used for her street show. Oh, excuse me. Goodness. Forgive me. That just came over me all of a sudden. So he's like, all right, I'm going to figure out a way to utilize that if Rati will show me how to make the cart. And it turns out that this is a huge secret and that she has never taught anybody how to do it. Not just like, I don't share my secrets with the people that I work with, but in her life, she has never taught anybody. And we wind up getting this moment where she basically is like, if you want to know, you have to become my student and honor me as a parent. Are you sure you want to do this? And Kinri, who I love to death, basically is immediately like, fuck yes, I'm sure. Are you kidding? You are really good at all of this. I want to know everything. So if the thing I have to do to find this out is to become your first and only student and learn all your secrets, wow, that's a really terrible thing. He's like, are you high? That's amazing. I'm getting the way better deal here. So then she says, let me talk to you by yourself. And we find out that she used to be a grave robber. She was part of a community of people, and they were not given the same kinds of rights as the rest of, I don't want to get into it because it's going to take too long and I'm like running out of time. But basically, her parents died. The people who had limited options for jobs that they were allowed to do were grave robbers, and they taught her the trade, and she began to come up with some ideas. But because eventually she suffered an injury that took away her ability to walk, and she came up with the wheeled chair and a means of navigating these underground tunnels safely in the chair so that she would be able to not only just find her way back, but remember her way around when she was in them. And I am going to be totally honest with you guys. I don't get how this works. I read this twice. Ken Liu goes into excruciating detail explaining how these knots work and the way they're attached to the axles of the chair or the cart and the way that they pull in certain directions in response to where the knots are. I tried so hard to picture it as he was saying it, and I could not keep it straight. And this is something that I would love to see a video of, because I wonder if there's anything out there. Like, this is something I'd be interested to search, except I can't because of spoilers, but maybe Kyle could. Are there readers out there who attempt to create some of the technology in life? Because the materials that are used in a lot of these projects are not unusual. It wouldn't be hard to get a hold of many of them. The one exception for like the Silkmatic lights is a pool of mercury, and mercury is dangerous to work with, but I'm not actually sure how difficult it is to obtain. So I would be very curious about that. I have to imagine, especially if these books continue to get more and more popular, there are going to be people out there attempting to create some of this stuff and see if it works, you know? But I just wanted to be honest with you all about the fact that I could not keep it straight in my head exactly how this is set up. And I felt like I understand. I really do. Why Ken Liu wants to explain to us how it works, because I think it's pretty important to him that we know it's physically possible, not just like theoretically, but this is not a basically like borderline magical like accomplishment. This is something that was created through engineering and careful thought and building. And he really wants it to get across to us that this is like something that is obtainable. However, I do think that when he starts to get a little bit too in the weeds with these explanations, it detracts a little bit from everything. And I might just feel that way because this time in particular, I didn't really understand. There have been a lot of explanations like this throughout these books. And a lot of the time, even though I might not quite get it, for the most part, I can see the general shape of things and understand. And maybe the fact that I can understand most of them is why I was able to like roll with it. And this being the first one that I'm genuinely like, oh man, I'm sorry, I really don't get it, means that it was less fun. And that's why I'm reacting like, you should really pull back on that a little bit, my guy. Maybe that's just, my reaction. But I just had to be honest about the fact that it just felt like the explanation of how it all worked dragged quite a bit for me. It just went on for a long time. The main thing about this that I'm really excited about is that Kinri is so excited to learn from Rati, and that she is so thrilled to have a student to teach this stuff, because she never had children and she never trusted anybody else with this information. So there has always been a sense that this really cool technology is going to die with her because she wasn't able to hand it on to anybody or trusted anyone enough. And part of the reason for that is because she would have to admit she was a grave robber, and she never wants people to know, because there is a huge stigma associated with not only grave robbing specifically because it's a crime, but the people that taught her were part of a caste that was given unsavory, unclean work to do, like handling bodies, and especially the bodies of like criminals and stuff, or people who had been sick. So though that had been like abolished with Emperor Ragan, but obviously that kind of stigma is a societal thing. It's not just because the laws say. So you can abolish that officially, but that doesn't change the way people look at you because you had that kind of contact with things and were part of that group of people. So that, combined with the fact that she was straight up robbing graves, it's just a huge mark of shame for her. And she has a really hard time with it. And it was just sort of touching to me how much she was certain Kinri was going to pull away and not want to learn from her anymore due to this, and how completely unchanged his attitude is toward her when he finds out. He's just like, oh, is that how? Yeah, well, what the fuck do I care? You came up with some really cool ideas. Tell me how you did it. And he just smooth sails right on past the like grave robbing part. He does not give a shit. Kyle says, so checking the notes at the end, it says Rati's machines are based on the mobile carts of Hero of Alexandria and the pattern looms of Han Dynasty China. Okay. Huh. I wonder, Hero of Alexandria. I don't even know what that is. That's interesting. I'll look into that. Well, I don't know if I can. Probably I can. So her and Kinri, he makes this like, he does the ritual that he has to do to swear that he is going to be her student. She is so thrilled by this. And he is very adept, very quick to catch on to the principles of how it works. And he even like figures out ways to permanently like create certain carts for certain tables specifically so that they can use this to serve different areas and not have to try and like constantly reprogram one cart. And he has a dream that gives him a clue about another way to control these things. And it's a weird, like, again, because I don't understand a lot of how this works, the dream and the explanation in the dream of how certain things, it is not the revelation to me that I think it's supposed to be, because since I don't understand the basic principle, this alteration isn't really hitting. It's the paya pipes, because in his dream, sort of his mother is there. As he played the pilot pipe, his mother stood to the side and pushed against the pumped-up bladder, and a powerful, magnificent music boomed from the hoard. It was a bone-rattling sound, felt as much as heard, and he sensed his whole body vibrating in sympathy as though he were being borne on the wings of Gerinifins. Looking down, he noticed the way the skin around the pilot pipe vibrated and changed as he pushed and pulled on the tube. The pilot pipe, being fashioned from an antler, was full of thick knobs with thinner segments between. The skin of the bladder stretched and relaxed around the tube by turns, and the sight reminded him of the knotted rope going through the hands of the storyteller, as well as the rope running between the razor-edged gears in Rati's mapping chair. So, obviously, to me, this is a god intervening for him. That's what this feels like. Now, maybe not. Maybe it's supposed to be that Kinri's just like having a kind of moment with his mother, and it's a psychic moment of a connection between the two of them. Based on the fact that she says, I can't answer your questions because it's not really me, you're talking to yourself, I think not. But, maybe a little bit of this and a little bit of that, who knows? Suffice to say that this way of controlling these carts is actually working really well. The only thing that kind of like doesn't come up that I feel is the real, what's the word I want, fly in the ointment for this idea, is what if an order is wrong or made incorrectly, or there's some sort of problem? That would be, then you just have like a customer just sort of waving or yelling out for an actual server. And then you start to get a little bit awkward. That doesn't come up, and that's fine. But it is one of the things with doing anything with automation that when you do encounter an issue, now you do have to involve a person. And it starts to feel like it's defeating the purpose a little bit. I do enjoy when he's presenting like the different version of his idea to Rati, how excited she is that he has managed to take her idea and run with it. Because again, she thought nobody was going to carry this on after she was gone. And not only is it going to be carried on, it's improved upon already. And it's been like 2 days. So yeah, that's pretty fun. So then let's see, we jump ahead here. And we go to this moment where Huto has gotten information about the way the Splendid Urn is operating. And he leaves the restaurant for a little while. What it turns out he's going to do is he is going to try and disrupt service at the Splendid Urn by using wolf piss to send the animals into a frenzy that are controlling the carts. And we know that the animals aren't actually in control of the carts, so it wouldn't have the effect that I think he would prefer. But I have to imagine that the animals freaking out in their cages would still wind up being a major problem, whether or not it was about the control of the carts themselves. You have these animals that are, all of them have been collected from people who do sort of street shows and things. Like, they're all animals that are trained to be appealing to people and to be cute and to, draw you in. And if they lose that quality because they are panicked, then people are going to start looking around for what's wrong and start to begin to see potentially how things are being done. And also, it's just going to disrupt a sort of sense of pleasant, like an outing that's really unusual, and turn it into probably a cacophony, if enough of these animals can make noises. So the team had sensed he was using this as a tool to disrupt things already. And they had a prediction that if he found out that they were using animals, he would go the same route again. So what they attempt to do here is they impersonate soldiers and they pretend to be a roadblock on the street that has to search his cart that's passing through. But the problem is he already recognizes one of them because the makeup they're using for their disguises isn't as good as usual. They're rushing a little bit. And once they find the proof, the buckets of wolf piss, he has already figured out that what they're doing, impersonating soldiers, is actually a much bigger deal than him sabotaging a restaurant. And while they could report him, and they do have some other circumstantial stuff that altogether adds up to looking very much like he's been sabotaging things, it's not really it would work if it were in a vacuum. But if he were to come forward with them impersonating soldiers, it's way worse for them. So, and this infuriated me so bad, you guys. He basically gets away with this because they were so sloppy with their disguises that he was able to see through them pretty quickly, which means they come to an agreement that they won't pursue this against him if he doesn't try and sabotage the splendid urn with the wolf piss. And that's as good as they're going to get for the evening. But now he knows about the way they impersonate people. And I feel like pretty much any avenue that involves them doing this again that they were going to pursue is closed. I don't see him getting fooled by this again. I feel like they overplayed their hand. And I hate the fact that he is able to just sort of walk away from this, it sucks. So let's see. This is when this happens in the midst of service, by the way. So the splendid urn and the treasure chest are still sending out dishes while he's over here doing this with them. So this is when they collect all of the votes and drop in a red pebble if you think the service tonight was top rate, a white if you think it was lacking, and a blue if you think it was just all right. And then at the end, his jar, the treasure chest, looks like it's filled with lotus seeds, whereas the splendid urns jar looked like it was full of ripe monkey berries. Sucks to suck. I love this because it turns out that the list of judges he was using to determine who to give priority service to, and I don't think this is real, but I think it works for the sake of what they're doing. Lolo tells him, we were thinking of starting a dining club and we were calling it the Judges. So all of those names are people that we were potentially going to be asking to join us as part of the club. Would you like to join? There is a membership fee. And he takes off in the middle of her sentence because he's so disgusted that he got played. And I love the way that this is written. The notion that he had been bested on the business battlefield. And it continues, by an indigo house girl was absolutely intolerable. But I just really enjoy the reminder that he thinks of business as a battlefield. I am certain a lot of people would talk like this as well. And maybe that's a fair way to approach it. But I always get the feeling when you use that kind of language too much, it's because you are insecure about your abilities and you're trying to posture. Like the way that he behaves in a lot of this kept reminding me of Ken Roy. And is it Ken? You know, the one from Succession. And just his whole sense of like, I'm so good at this and I'm such a badass that he starts off with in the first season. And it turns out that he's like kind of clueless and he is getting played, but he is so overconfident that he doesn't see what's right in front of his face. And the difference is that I had more sympathy for that guy than I do for Huto, who is a true monster. I'm just really, I don't know where this is going here, because Huto is just smart enough to be able to like keep himself from totally sinking, but he has enough oversights and enough ego that then he winds up in spots that he could easily have avoided if he had listened to fucking anyone. So I have no doubt what he's up to is going to be revealed at some point, but I can't think how it's going to happen. I don't know. I would love it if Mozomu was involved in the revelation of it because she deserves to like have a hand in it. But I don't know how simple that will even be. And also, I have to mention, like, Kinri is still just pining for Dandelion. And there's just a real sense of, like, Romeo and Juliet to them. And I hope that there isn't, like, a fucking horrific, tragic ending for them. Because I would really enjoy seeing a relationship flourish between these two sides that wasn't done for the sake of forcing an alliance, like with Thera and her husband. I feel like things worked out for them and they genuinely do care about each other at this point. But here, this is the two of them not knowing who each other are and still being like drawn to one another. And that's something that I would like to work out just because it's a rare thing. So yeah, that's the chapter. I really do enjoy this. I just, I'm going to look up like reviews of this book once I'm done with it because I'm super curious how other people felt in general. So, all right. Well, thank you so much, you guys, for hanging out with me. Thank you, Kyle, for the flexibility of moving it to today. Sorry that I have a cold and I sound like shit. Appreciate y'all's patience on that. But really glad that I actually first like read these chapters a couple weeks ago at this point. So I was really excited to finally get to record on them. All right. Thank you guys again. And I will be seeing you next year with a new couple of chapters. Until then, toodaloo, motherfuckers.
That was an Unspoiled Network podcast.